Hello guys, Uncle Vasil here with yet another British history video. This time's video is about William the Conqueror. William the Conqueror's rise from an illegitimate Norman duke to the king who reshaped England is one of the most dramatic transformations in medieval history. His life is a story of survival, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of power that changed the language, laws, and identity of an entire nation. Let's get started. William's early life begins with a single, defining disadvantage. He was born around 1028 as the illegitimate son of Duke Robert I of Normandy, a status that immediately placed him at risk in a world where lineage determined power. Because of this, Norman nobles saw him as an easy target, and after his father died when William was still a child, the duchy plunged into years of chaos. Powerful lords fought for control, rival families tried to assassinate him, and several of his guardians were murdered in the political violence surrounding his claim. Growing up in an environment where betrayal was common and survival depended on decisiveness, William learned to be calculating, disciplined, and unflinchingly harsh when necessary. These early struggles forged him into a commander who trusted few people, relied heavily on military strength, and developed the strategic ruthlessness that later allowed him to seize and hold the English throne. William's claim to the English throne rested on a mix of personal promises, political maneuvering, and oaths that carried enormous weight in the 11th century. He argued that King Edward the Confessor, who had spent part of his youth in Normandy, had privately named him as heir, something William believed was reinforced by Edward's Norman-friendly court. Adding to this, William insisted that Harold Godwin's son, England's most powerful noble, had once been shipwrecked in Normandy and, while in William's custody, swore a sacred oath to support William's future claim to the crown. Oaths made on holy relics were considered binding before God, so when Edward died in January 1066 and Harold took the throne for himself, William saw it not just as political treachery but as a moral and religious betrayal. Convinced that his right had been violated, he rallied Norman nobles, secured papal approval for his cause, and began assembling the invasion force that would ultimately change the course of English history. William's invasion of England in 1066 reached its decisive moment at the Battle of Hastings, where his Norman forces met Harold Godwinson's exhausted Anglo-Saxon army in a brutal, day-long fight that reshaped the future of the island. Harold's men had just marched south after defeating a Viking invasion at Stamford Bridge, leaving them tired and under strength, while William arrived with fresh troops, cavalry, and archers, an advantage the Anglo-Saxons lacked. The battle turned when Harold was killed, reportedly by an arrow or in the final melee, causing the English shield wall to collapse and the army to break. With Harold dead and no strong leader left to rally resistance, William advanced toward London, securing key towns until the English nobles finally submitted. His victory ended centuries of Anglo-Saxon rule and opened the door to sweeping Norman changes in language, law, land ownership, and culture, making Hastings one of the most transformative events in English history. William's coronation on Christmas Day in 1066 marked the moment he transformed from a foreign conqueror into England's new king, but securing that crown proved far harder than winning it on the battlefield. Large parts of the country, especially the north, refused to accept Norman rule, and William faced repeated uprisings from Anglo-Saxon nobles, local leaders, and even foreign-backed rebels. His response was uncompromising. He built castles across the landscape to project Norman power, replaced English lords with loyal Norman barons, and crushed resistance with overwhelming force. The most infamous example was the Harrying of the North, 1069 to 1070, when William ordered a scorched earth campaign after a major rebellion near York. Villages were burned, crops destroyed, and thousands of people were left to starve, turning the region into a wasteland for years. These brutal measures secured his authority and ended large-scale resistance, but they also left a lasting scar on England and revealed the harsh, iron-fisted approach William believed was necessary to hold a kingdom he had fought so hard to claim. William's rule transformed England so completely that the country emerging after his reign looked and sounded different from the one he conquered. By bringing Norman French into the royal court, the church, and the legal system, he created a society where French became the language of power while Old English survived among common people. Over time, the two blended into the early form of English we recognize today. He also dismantled the old Anglo-Saxon aristocracy, confiscating their lands and replacing them with loyal Norman barons whose wealth and authority depended entirely on him, ensuring no native noble could challenge his rule. To secure this new elite, William ordered the construction of imposing stone castles, such as the Tower of London, which served not only as military strongholds but as constant reminders of Norman dominance over the landscape. Alongside this, he tightened the feudal system, making all land legally his property and granting it only in exchange for military service and loyalty, creating a rigid hierarchy that bound every lord and peasant to the king's authority. These sweeping changes reshaped England's culture, law, and social structures so deeply that the Norman conquest remains one of the most transformative events in the nation's history. William's decision to order a kingdom-wide survey in 1085 created one of the most extraordinary documents of the Middle Ages. Faced with threats of rebellion and the possibility of foreign invasion, he wanted an exact record of who owned what, how much land was being farmed, what resources existed, and how much tax could be demanded. Royal commissioners traveled from shire to shire, gathering testimony from landowners, priests, and villagers, recording everything from livestock numbers to mills, fisheries, and even how many slaves lived on each estate. The results were compiled into what became known as the Doomsday Book, a name suggesting that its judgments were as final as those on Judgment Day. For William, it was a tool of control, proof that every acre ultimately belonged to the king and that no noble could hide wealth or power from him. For historians today, it is an unparalleled snapshot of 11th century England, preserving details about everyday life, land distribution, and social structure that appear nowhere else in medieval Europe. By the end of his reign, William had left a legacy that reached far beyond the battlefield. His reforms, his rule, and the world he built laid the foundations of a new England. This is the end of the video, guys. I hope you found this educational. For more history content, please check my channel. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe.